So today we are going to start Rails. We've been doing Sinatra so far, and Sinatra is very small, low level, piece by piece. It does all the work for you. Rails does a lot more of the common parts for you. So it's like the difference between building a house by starting from like digging the dirt yourself and making your own bricks as opposed to just buying bricks. You still have to build the house yourself, but at least you have more components to make it. So instead of having to figure out how do I make a door entirely from scratch, you just buy pre-made door with pre-made hinges and handles and all that kind of stuff. In fact, actually, I think a door handle is a good example. It's like, it's a common pattern that is used over and over again. And every house needs door handles somewhere, but every house has door handles differently. And it's up to you how you use the door handle. You can have 2 door handles, 5 door handles, you can rearrange it with something else. And Rails is quite similar like that it gives you tools. It still doesn't build the site for you. It's up to you to kind of take the tools that it gives you and put them together to arrange your site. But it gives you a lot more tools than Sinatra does. I'm going to explain a lot more about what Rails is and why it's different and all that stuff, but just for the beginning, this is kind of what we're aiming for by the end of the week. Actually, all right. So the first 2-ish days we'll mostly be redoing the same stuff we did in Sinatra. Because again, we kind of need to cover the boring theory a bit. So for the first 2 days, we'll kind of cover what we did in Sinatra, but the Rails equivalent. And then towards the end of the week, and as the rest of the weeks go on, we're going to start adding new features and just seeing how Rails can do stuff quicker. And so this is what the aim for the end of this week is. Well, actually, probably by Wednesday we should have most of this. My CSS is broke, and to be honest, mostly non-existent. So it's mostly we're looking at features rather than styly stuff. But I want to have a site that I can log in. I do this. So I can log in, I know that I'm logged in, and I can have pictures uploaded. And when I upload a picture, I can upload a picture and it kind of makes this Instagram-y thing. Obviously, it needs to be styled much better to be really like Instagram, but you get the idea. Like the functionality is what we're aiming for, and it knows who uploaded what picture. I don't think I did it on this one, did I? Oops. Oh, I did. Okay. And then when I go to a single users page, I know who.com, he uploaded these 3 pictures. I'm going to go to user 2, he uploaded these ones. So again, functionality of like a basic Instagram thing, that I have users that can sign in and sign out, that when they upload a picture, I can go, hey, let's show me Dave's pictures. Alright, so that's the aim, by Wednesday, and mostly Thursday and Friday, depends on how the progress of the first few days go. So, where were we? Alright, so I'm going to ramble about Rails for a bit, actually. Oh, actually, will I? Yeah, I'll come back to those. Okay, so Ruby on Rails was created by, what was that name? The Basecamp. I can never remember the product. So Basecamp was a website, totally normal product, and they started their site from scratch. Kind of the same way we started with Sinatra from scratch. And they built up all this stuff. They built a big complicated website, and they realized like, well, we put all these reusable components. We can build our second site using the same components. And once they did that, they were like, well, this is quite neat, but maybe other people could use the same thing. Because, so Basecamp is like a to-do list, but like more so, or like a project management app. So their theory was like, well, okay, if somebody builds like Facebook, they're not competing with us. So it's not like we lose anything if we release this, like these tools and this code to other people. So they kind of tidied it up a bit, turned it into this like reusable framework and published to the world, and it kind of exploded from there. Everyone was like, oh my god, this is really nice. And I'm only kind of half sure why it got popular. Alright, so does that explain do you guys know what a framework is and what that means? It's like these reusable chunks. It's like they took Basecamp and took the generic parts out and turned them into like tools and put all those tools together in a big blob and called it Rails. And the reason why it got really successful is because it let you build stuff quickly without sacrificing anything. So for example, there's been lots of other attempts to make programming simple. Oh, actually, wait, let's go to the insane version first. Alright, so programming in the beginning was very, very complicated. This is assembly language. This is like literally what the processor speaks. So whenever you do Ruby, it translates, or whenever you do anything, like if you click something in Google Chrome or you open something in Microsoft Word, down at the processor level, this is what's happening. And obviously this makes absolutely no sense. Like, if it didn't have these comments, you could never tell what this is. So as the years go by, there's been new languages, new libraries, new frameworks to make it easier and easier. So for example, push.js, XOR, AX, makes no sense. But at the other extreme, you've got basic, is there an example? Actually, this one's not so readable, but at least it's English. And the catch is that quite often when people try and make it simpler, they lose power and ability. Will this work? Nope. Visual coding. So every few years, someone will come out with these new visual programming languages. That the theory is instead of writing code, you click stuff and drag it around. Oh, actually. What was that one? Yep. The problem is it always loses like power and flexibility. So you end up kind of only being able to make really limited programs with it. Because the simpler you try and make it, it's kind of like the more you have to take away. And if you take away the wrong bits, suddenly you can't do anything. Rails somehow managed to like balance that line really well, which is why it got so popular. It managed to make it not too complicated, or like be really easy to understand and do complex things, but in a simple way and without losing too much. So, actually, can I find this? So you can read a Rails app, even if you've never like coded before, and it generally kind of makes sense. Like not a lot, but like even if you've never even heard of programming, it's something like redirect to user find by username Edward. So even if you don't know programming, that's something to do with I'm finding the user Edward and I'm redirecting to it. And so it's still readable, it's still usable.
But that's Ruby, right? I mean, it's just
yes.
structure.
And actually that's probably where it gets quite blurry, that almost Rails there's Rails the framework, and then there's the kind of philosophy behind how it works. And this actually is one of the examples of like to make your code read like English, like try and name everything in a way that kind of makes sense. Like, because remember we can call variable names anything. So we could change all this to be like So this would still work, but wouldn't make any sense. And the Rails philosophy is the reverse of like, let's try and build it all not to be like perfectly readable English, because again, actually any language, any programming language that's tried that to be like English has broken horribly, because suddenly you end up trying to do complex things but with English grammar and it just gets weird. It's just this philosophy of like, be readable. And there's a whole bunch of philosophies, like for example, one is to never be surprising. So everything in Rails will do roughly what it sounds like. So user find by name will find something to do with the name. And there's a whole bunch of those philosophies, but they're quite fuzzy. So that combination of like nifty tools and good philosophy kind of led to just a really nice framework. Oh, I had a train of thought there and I lost it. Yeah, okay, so that's basically what Rails is. Like Sinatra, but bigger, more tools, more useful. Got really popular, and the more popular it got, that meant the more people were polishing it and finding the bad bits and making them better. End result is the current version 4.2, I think, is pretty damn nice. It's very popular. It's probably the most popular one for like medium-sized sites. Its main downside is that it's not great at huge sites like Twitter and Facebook. At that point, it kind of breaks down a bit. Okay, what have I got next? So in a minute, we're gonna like go back to what Sinatra was, review what we did in Sinatra and how it worked, so we can use it as a comparison. Because everything works slightly differently. Same principles and ideas, but arranged in a different order, and just the fine details are different. But I guess a few warnings. The main one being that Rails, my one dislike of it is that in the beginning it's really complicated. So if in the beginning you find it confusing and weird and there's too many moving parts and you don't know how they fit together, that is entirely normal. It will take a good 2 weeks until it kind of coalesces, and then like another year until you really like get it. And that's very normal. So basically it requires patience. The upside is that you can use it even if you don't understand it. Like it uses this pattern called MVC, and I used the MVC pattern wrong for like a whole year or so until I saw somebody else doing it right and really understood it. So the sites I built still worked. They weren't as elegant as they should be, but they did work. So even if you don't entirely understand it, you can still kind of shoehorn bits together quite easily. So yeah, that's the main warning. Take your time, don't worry if it seems confusing, everyone gets confused by it. I still find bits of it quite crazy. My suggestion actually for getting around that is to read it from as many different perspectives as possible. So with things that are quite conceptually confusing, I think every author explains it just in their own words, which means they'll take a slightly different perspective on it, and maybe one, like on each individual point, maybe one person's explanation doesn't make sense to you, but the next person does. But then when you move on to the next topic, the first person phrases it in a way that makes sense. And it's not that either of them is particularly correct, it's just that they'll phrase it in a way that for you fits better. Because the next person to come along will find a different author with a different perspective, fits their experience. So my recommendation is to kind of read this from as many different perspectives as you can, or have the patience for. So once I've explained it, go through the Rails guide. This one is very like step-by-steppy fine detail, but not a lot of explanations. The Codecademy is very, we're going to like guide you piece by piece. I quite like this Odin project one actually. It's probably the best one for where we're at. I'm going to put links to these in Google Drive, so don't worry if you don't get it now. I think the Odin project one is probably the best for like our current level and kind of rate of progress. For example, the Hartle Guide, because there's this book by Michael Hartle, and it's kind of the definitive guide. Where's the link to read it? And it's really great if you have the patience for it. If you can force yourself to like sit through the 40 odd hours it takes to get through it, you will have learned everything there is to know about Rails. But he goes into like super detail like right from the beginning.
Like, I mean, if you read a lot about stuff that you've never actually seen in action, then it usually doesn't give you as much, right? So you hear in theory about Bitbucket and you hear about MVC and whatever, but then you think it's more effective to like get started on some things, and then once you start having seen a few of these things, then get into the or is this like the actual start at zero?
To be honest, I think most programmers just learn by getting stuck in. Or I mean, the perfect way is you have, well, like here we have a teacher who will exactly tell you the right sentence at the right time and give you the live demo, which to some degree we're going to do, but it'll never be perfect, never cover everything.
Yeah.
So again, my personal philosophy, and actually this is why I'm saying the repetition thing. So because maybe I read the Rails Guide book and go, I see the Bitbucket thing, but it made no sense. And then, what do you mean? That's a bad example. So for example, this Rails Guide, no one ever understands the Rails Guide, and I think that's still okay. Because the reason why I assigned this one to read it is it's like the first look, and somewhere I'll see in here it says like, application routes file. Okay, there's this routes file, I can run routes, there's something about articles and create and edit and show. I see it, so like I'll see this edit, create and show, but not really know what it means. And that's fine, because then when I go to this book, I know it's in here somewhere, I'll see him mention edit, create and show and go, wait, I've seen that before, and then it pieces together a little bit more. And then I don't know, I'll Google for something like image uploads, and somebody on Stack Overflow will mention, in your edit action, do this thing. And then I'll go, okay, that piece is a bit more. So it's not like a linear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's kind of like, I mean, I actually think of it as like a tree. Well, okay, I'll come back to the tree thing in a second. So it's this blob, because actually like after day one, like you can do the beginning of Ruby, step 1, 2, 3, but after that it's just like stuff. And I'm going to try and like put it as linearly as possible. But even that is kind of like, I have to hide. I almost have to actually kind of lie nearly at some points and like pretend things don't exist to make that work.
That's fine. I mean, as long as you just say, forget about this for now. Just put it in there and say it has to be there.
Yeah, actually that's kind of almost what I meant by patience. And to be really relaxed about not understanding stuff. With the kind of trust that it will happen eventually. So I'll re-explain that. So the problem with Rails is that there's 3 core parts to it, well 4 I guess. And you can't understand numbers 2, 3 and 4 until you understand number 1. But you can't understand number 2 unless you understand 1, 3 and 4. And you can't understand number 3 and so on. So there is no 1, 2, 3, 4, it's like, it won't make sense, it won't make sense, it won't make sense, and then it clicks and you're like, okay. Where was I going with that? So yes, I mean that's almost why you kind of, I think with Rails it's impossible to understand all in one go. Anyway, but you get the idea. It'll be slightly crazy, but it's not like super nuts. It's just, it takes a bit of, if you have the feeling that it's all weird, that's normal and it goes away. Yeah, so be relaxed about just letting it arrive. Yeah, so basically there's all these cool guides out there. They're really good. If you find one that you like better than others, just go with it. For the most part, what I'm going to do is explain like the concepts actually and how everything fits together. I like the context. The guides are much better for like the fine details, like now in this file type exactly that kind of thing. Okay. So, alright, enough philosophy stuff. Let's review Sinatra for a bit. Because we're going to need to kind of think about how we did Sinatra so that we can, not that one. Yeah. So everything we did in Sinatra, I was sneakily doing as preparation for Rails. So now when you go to Rails, at least some of it will make sense. Okay, so key things about Sinatra. We had it all in one server RB, and it was all quite manual. That we explicitly told it, load up this thing, here's your configuration file, okay, we're still going to need these. Yeah, but there was a lot of manual setup. It didn't do anything unless we told it to, for the most part. What did we do? The main core of the site is these like get something, render a template. So basically when the browser goes to this URL, look through these list of URLs until you find one that matches, do some thinking, and then decide what template to run. And that's kind of like the core loop of Sinatra. Browser asks for an URL, decides which action to do, and then gives back some HTML from an ERB template. And that's one to kind of fix in your mind, because we're going to look at that in Rails. Other bits we did, we included the active record thing, which was the database connection. And we did this with these things called models. They were a little bit magic, but it turned them into kind of basic Ruby objects that we can do like post.all, post.new, post.find, and post.create is somewhere, and save. So yeah, we can manipulate the database with these Ruby objects. Other things that we did, we had ERB templates, which is like HTML, but with Ruby code inside. Oops. Good example? Yeah, there we go. So we can print out, we can do like thinking inside the views. We had some magic folders. For example, the views folder and the public folder, and also the gem file were all, what's the word? Like we didn't have to tell it where those were because they had the correct folder name. And again, that's going to be a bigger thing in Rails, that it does that pattern a lot more. That there's a lot of things that instead of you telling it how to find it, it just knows because there's this pattern of what folder. We had a public folder to keep images and style sheets in. We used database migrations to manipulate the database. So we could add columns, we could create tables. We had a gem file so that we knew what other libraries to install. So what third-party tools did we want to bring in? All helpers, and one thing we briefly did was to make like functions for the URLs to make it easier in the views. When we wanted to link to stuff, instead of having to remember what the URL was, we just said, hey, give me the URL. Okay, so Sinatra all remembered. Everything, so, and the review for this is just to kind of keep it in your head, so now when we see Rails, you can kind of bring it into context in the comparison. Okay, actually this is the point where you guys need to start doing something. Let's get rid of all this. interface. So we're going to need a new terminal window. Actually, I can do that. And you probably want to make a folder called week3. Actually, just one last thing is to show what we did last week. No. No, this is all different. Okay, well anyway. So we made so I just want to show you the user interface. So, because it took us about 2 days to make this thing, that we had posts, that we could show the post, we could edit the post, we could create a new post, from, oh. Okay, because what I'm about to do is recreate the same thing, but in Rails. And this is the next 5 minutes or so are pretty much what caused Rails to be so popular. Oh, actually, just to double check, well, okay. So, to create a new Rails project, instead of us doing it by hand, like in Sinatra, where we created server RB and all the folders like public and views and stuff, Rails has a generator thing. So you just do Rails new project name. I'm gonna call mine first lesson.
By the way, where does it get the information from? What do you do with it? How to process that command? Is it a RVM?
It's a bit weird. So for example, if you install the Twitter gem, the Twitter gem you only use in your like Ruby code.
Yeah.
The Rails gem is both.
It's a global.
Yeah, when you install it, it kind of like hooks itself into your operating system, so that now the terminal knows what does Rails new mean.
So once you've installed like RVM or
you need to do Rails or gem install Rails if you haven't already. Basically, try this, and if it says I don't know what Rails is, try gem install Rails.
And then, but yeah.
And it will fiddle for a bit. while it's fiddling, it's just told me what all it's created. And you can see some of the things that we had before, like the gem file in there. There's a views folder. You don't really need to worry about all these, I'm just kind of picking out some of the more interesting ones. Yeah, it's installing a ton of stuff. Oh. The internet is flaky today, which may make life interesting. Okay, but basically actually, while it's waiting, I'll look in the Finder. Or no, not really the Finder. So it's created all of these folders, the app bin config, whole ton of stuff. So we didn't need to create our own server RB, it's like created places for us that it will put the code, or that we can put the code, if that makes sense. And is this still, ooh. What? Okay, so did everybody get that? Ah, yeah, no, that worked. Okay, cool. So did everybody get that working and not having error?
Just to avoid any mistakes for later on, I didn't install Rails with sudo. I just did it without sudo.
That should be good. RVM should hopefully put it in the right place for you.
Okay. So far we didn't install it.
Yes. To some degree, gems, if they work, you just kind of go, okay then. And it's only if it really breaks that you start tearing it apart. Alright, so next one. So this bit, make sure you don't make any typos. Generate scaffold post title string body text published.
And this is outside of the folder that you.
Very good point. So I'm just gonna copy. So, where did it go? Too many windows. Alright, there's one mistake that everybody makes when you start a new Rails app, including me. Because it creates a folder with all the stuff in it, you need to cd into it, or it will go and give you a weird error. So if you type ls, you'll see that folder that it created, and yeah. So always remember that. It's incredibly annoying, I still forget.
Yeah.
But basically if you try and run a Rails command and it gives you this weird, like it just prints out, not even an error, like it's kind of printing out suggestions for how to use it. That's why, because it's not in a Rails app, it still thinks you're trying to do Rails new. Okay, so now if you do cd first lesson, and we type this thing, oh, it's gone too fast. So you want Rails generate scaffold post. So we want, just like our Sinatra app, to have a post model and have posts created and destroyed and all that stuff. So we're saying, hey, generate me stuff for the post, and these are what it should have: a title, a body, and published. Okay, did that work for everybody? So when you run it, it'll tell you, hey, I'm creating more stuff again. Don't worry too much about, or definitely don't worry about reading it all at this point, but it created a migration, some posts, some views, tests, which we'll never use. Anyway, it created a bunch of stuff. We'll come back to what it actually did, but we can now do rake db migrate, and it will create it in the database for real. So again, I'm going through these steps quickly, and we're going to come back. It's mostly I want to show you the end result.
Just migrate.
Yep, rectdb migrate, and if rectdb migrate works, then type Rails server to start the server.
That's pretty cool. No error messages.
No error messages, and then the cool bit, we should be able to go to localhost 3000. Oh yeah, so it's on a different port now. It used to be, Sinatra defaults to 4, 5, 6, 7. Rails uses 3000, there's no particular reason. But if that worked, I can click new post, a new post. This was much.
Which RB do we start here?
You don't. You type Rails server. And again, I'm going to explain that in a bit. And if Rails server starts without exploding, dun dun dun, I already have a working blog thing.
That's a bit faster.
Yes. And that demo is pretty much why Rails got popular, because somebody posted that in a video and everyone went, oh my god, I'm not using PHP anymore, this is so much better. It is a bit of a trick, because only certain things you can do with that generator thing, or the generator is like building features for you. There's only certain features you can build with it, but that's still quite a big jump. That like you get like 80% of your site done in 5 minutes, but then you've only got to do like the last bits.
You can focus on like making it actually something unique or special rather than
Exactly.
pedestrian stuff.
So I don't know, just as an example, I don't know, let's look at Twitter.
Was Twitter built with Rails or just written straight in Ruby?
Yeah, Twitter actually was originally, so it was Ruby on Rails for the first, I can't remember how many years. Oh no, go away. Until they got about, I think when they got to about 100 million, or is it 100 million? I don't know, several numbers of millions, eventually it started to kind of like break down, because it just wasn't, the amount of data that was going through Twitter was just too fast for Rails to handle. So they had to rewrite it all in Java. So, is a bit of a problem if you get to Twitter size, but on the other hand, at that point,
You have other problems.
yes. And yeah, so it was, I don't know if it was the biggest, I think it probably was the biggest. There's been a few other really big ones. Biggest, I think Airbnb is, I don't know, I think Airbnb is also, that's probably a good example that Airbnb is just in the last year or so hit that moving away from Rails scale. So up until now they've been 100% Rails. And SoundCloud as well, they're also at that point that they've been Ruby on Rails until now-ish, or the last year, and now they're starting to like switch. So that gives you an idea of the kind of size you can build. But on the other hand, that the size that it stops working. And that's actually what I meant earlier about the like making a simple framework without losing power. That like you don't see big apps written in, I don't know, Visual Basic, because it doesn't really work on big stuff. Or it kind of does, but you end up hating yourself.
It takes too much time.
A lot of the time, like because the language is taking stuff out, either things are impossible or you have to do a huge amount of work to make a simple thing happen.
Okay, whereas like if you wrote something in C, you'd be like spending 100 million years to even, because you give every single
see as the reverse, that you can do anything, but you have to do it yourself. Can I think of an example? Okay, I can't think of an example. I could spend a while thinking, but anyway. Okay, so I don't know, just to compare like Twitter to this thing, or to where did it go? Like, it's kind of 80% similar. It's like the fine details that you need to fiddle with. And that's kind of where Rails gets you to. Then you're working on the interesting details instead of just endless stuff.
And we actually have a plan for this, but it'd be cool to just look at the files that make this happen right now, and how they look compared to what we've done.
Yep. Oh, hang on. Oops. Where's that? So that's what we're going to do next. Okay. Where's my script? Oh, did I get that? Okay. So let's first open it in Sublime. So you'll need to open that folder in Sublime Text so that we can run around and look at what was actually in it. First lesson. Alright, and there were many things that were different but in a similar way. Actually, maybe let's just jump around some of the easiest ones. So go to app, views, posts, index, ERB. I don't know, just change the title to uppercase and blog posts. So that's app, views, index, HTML.erb. So it's the exact same ERB templates. They're working in the exact same way that our Sinatra ones worked. That you can do this, print out an item, you can do .each. So actually, can I bring up? Yeah, so down the bottom I have our, where's this gone? So on the bottom was the Sinatra one that we did, at post.each, do post.title. So the Rails one is literally identical. There's a tiny difference that it has a different file name now. It's like index.html.erb instead of just .erb. But I will try and mention that a bunch of other times. Or yeah, so right now we're going on like the quick tour around the structure, so don't worry about like picking up the fine details. So we're going to come back to everything. What else is the same? We have, where is this? We used to have a server.rb. Where's index? So we used to have a posts index, and then there we did at posts, post.all. We still have the same thing in Rails, but it's moved around a bit. So it's the same general concept that each page has a def, blah blah blah. Well, it's actually get instead of def. For example, the create is very similar. So we did post new, stuff from params. We got post new, stuff from params, a little different but not too crazy. If post.save, do one thing, else do something else. In our Sinatra one, we had if post.save, do one thing, else do something else. So we still have that same concept that each page has like an action of Ruby code that basically handles the page. How much sense does that make? Because it's a little bit, that might have been a little bit quick.
Just trying to find
this is the posts controller in app controllers post controller. And basically these controllers are the same as the server, as like the core bit of the server RB of these things. So we'll explain exactly how they work later, but the general gist of like the code that you used to put into these things, you now put into a controller action. and the general setup of the code is pretty similar. Like for example, you do post.all and post.new, da 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 da. Something that is the same but has moved is that we used to have these models up here to tell it where to find the database connection and the validations and everything to do with the post. Now they get their own folder and their own file. So class post active record base. In R1 we had class post active record base. So I can actually put this in. Actually, okay, so another cool Rails demo. So if you guys do the same thing, I don't know, maybe just pick the first line if you can't copy paste.
Where did you from?
I copied mine from the, it's probably easiest if you just type it. Yeah, so just type line 2 if you're typing it by hand. Yeah, so this is app models toast.rb. And I guess basically the gist of that is that server.rb has now been split across 20 different places, but it's
still working the same way, right? I mean, it's still referring to.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same like components and concepts, but now it's spread out.
And I guess the what's it called, the post controller.rb is referring to all these other branches somewhere.
Yes. Exactly how it's connected is pretty crazy and magic. So we're definitely going to take a lot of detail in this one. But yes, generally anything to do with posts goes in the post controller. Yeah, actually there's a lot of things to mention, so I'll leave that. But yeah, so we've got all of the same parts of server RB, it's just now they're in multiple places. So if that worked, just try creating a new post and try creating a post, and hey presto, we get that errors thing. And remember that also took us like half a day to make that work. Gonna come back to how that works because it's quite magic, but it's one of those kind of built-in components of Rails, so it's quite nice. Let's see.
Post controls.
We still have a gem file, same as before. Comes with a lot of like gems pre-written. We can add our own ones, we can remove ones. One thing that is different is that in Sinatra we had to tell it. It was like a two-step thing that we did. The gem file was only for installing the gem, and we had to like manually tell it when do we want to load it. Rails gets a bit magic in now that's both because of the gem file, that when you put in a gem in a gem file in the Rails gem file, it both installs it and auto-loads it. There are some exceptions where it doesn't auto-load it, but I've never really figured out why that happens. It's just kind of depends on the gem. But for the most part, you just shove it in there and it loads it. Let's see what else is the same. Public folder, still exactly the same. So we can put all of our images, and we can put the CSS in there, but it has an extra feature that is nicer than that. But you could put the CSS there if you wanted.
But would we still use bundle, or would that?
Yep, still use bundle to install gems. I think that one again is one of those, it will become obvious just by using it things. I hope.
This is it doesn't get a bit confusing if you have a gem file which says which gems should be partly part of the project, and then you install bundle install, or you gem install something else. Then don't you use like a track of which like some of the gems that are being used are in the gem files, others aren't, because
For the most
or-
part, it should always, basically, if it's in the project, have it in here.
Yeah.
And for the most part, RVM and bundle will just magically get it right.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't. I still don't exactly know when it gets it wrong.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if you know you need a gem, you put it in this thing, and that will deal with both the installing
Right,
and the
exactly.
loading. If you have more than one version of the same gem on your computer, it will normally, like 99% of the time, just load the correct one. Sometimes it doesn't, and then you can write bundle exec,
Yeah.
blah blah blah, which is like a super serious, like look at the gem file, pick the one I told you, don't screw around. But in general, you generally don't need the bundle exec thing. For the most part, as long as you put it in the gem file, it will load it and install it correctly. It will even sometimes tell you if you have forgotten to bundle, it will just tell you, go do another bundle install, but only sometimes. Okay, so gem file, a little different, not too crazy. Layout is the same. So in the views folder, so again, it's like with this magic folder names thing, that we don't have to tell it too much where everything is, because it created a folder called views for us, so we put the views in there and then it knows where to find them. And again, that's one of the Rails philosophies of like, instead of screwing around with configuration, so there's the Java Spring framework, you end up with like thousands upon thousands of lines of configuration files to tell it where everything is and exactly how you want everything to work. But it means you spend half your life configuring it. Whereas the Rails way is like, well, everyone's going to have a folder to put their templates in. Let's just put it all in the same folder. And that works out really well. So, maybe the next one to find is if you try and find app views layouts application.html.erb. This is the layout file, same as normal. Let's just put a h1, my first Rails site. Okay. So yeah, just like Sinatra, this one is the same, that we have a layout file, it's normal HTML, we can put stuff in it and it will appear on every page. So again, things are the same. One thing that you'll notice is different is there's these crazy style sheet link tags and JavaScript link tags. Rails loads the CSS and JavaScript magically. Again, we're going to come back to that, but that bit is different. But yeah, something to come back to. And I think, is that mostly it? I guess the last bit that's the same is the database migrations. Okay, alright, so maybe stop there and then start again from a different perspective. Okay, so that was kind of a list of things that are similar to Sinatra. And as you can see, it generally, like on the whole, is quite the same. Like it's still Ruby, it's still HTML views, you still have like a thing for each page that decides what to do. The layout, like how everything fits together is very different, but the general like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is quite like conceptually similar. And then just to kind of review that, I'm going to go back to the generator and it told us, well actually I'll look at both of the generators and see what they told us that it did. So when I ran Rails new first lesson, it created like the placeholders for everything. So the gem file, folders for the models and controllers and the views. It didn't create very many files, it's pretty much, it just created like empty folders. So Rails new on its own just kind of like sets up the, the folders and files ready for you to put content. And on its own it doesn't do very much. The next bit was the generator, which was quite crazy. And again, we're going to come back to generators. But generators just create files exactly the same way you would have created the files. So it's no different from like you going to Sublime and creating the view yourself and the controller yourself. So it seems a little magic, but it's not so much. And what did it do? It created a migration, same as normal. So you remember the migrations from Sinatra? It's the exact same thing, that we have a file that says, it tells the database, create me a table called posts, I want these database fields. And again, this is stuff we're going to do over and over and over again, so don't worry about like the exact fine details. It created that models file. So class post active record base, it created that file. So this one on the migration, it creates the table, but still the app doesn't know about it. So it creates a model for us to tell the app where it is. Creates some test stuff that we don't really need. This bit I'll come back to. It created the controller, which is like the core bit of server RB that decides what each page should do. And then it created the views. It created a bunch of other stuff that we don't really care about. And the views are pretty much identical to what we did in Sinatra. That you have kind of print me out some Ruby stuff, da 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 da. And the reason why it can do that is because most sites kind of follow that pattern. Like,
is that like a main controller, or how's that structured? Like, is there like a hierarchy between them?
No. Well, yes and no.
It's a bit confusing.
Yes and no.
That's true.
Yeah, so exactly what I told you. So yes, it's very confusing, and that's very normal. So I'm going to come back to controllers in a minute. Actually, where is my script? What was I going to do next? Alright, so actually, yeah, let's do that next. Oh, actually no, I'll finish my sentence and then finish that. I'll go to the next bit. So that generator file, like it managed to create the views without us really telling us anything, because most sites follow the same pattern. It's like we have a database table with title, body and published, and you probably want to print out title, body and published. So I don't know, if you go to Amazon, you have an index page that lists the items. When you go to the item from on product, blah blah blah, it prints out the title, the price, da da da. And that's how the scaffold can do what it does, because every site uses that same general pattern. It goes, well, okay, I can give you this off-the-shelf template because you're probably only going to change little bits of it. You're totally free to not use it. You can go completely from scratch the Sinatra way of like, actually, I don't like this setup. I don't want to have index and edit and stuff. I want to do something else. You're still free to go that way. Alright, so that was very confusing. I need a whiteboard. Actually, no, wait, I want to do something else first. So you guys don't need to do this. I'm going to do something else. Okay, so I got a couple of like small bits to mention, then I'm gonna draw a diagram on the whiteboard that will hopefully clear stuff up. Alright. Oh, what am I looking for? Yeah, here we go. And this one. Alright. So, because we want to know what is this controller thing and what goes in there and what doesn't go in there. So just to review the Sinatra thing again, we had a bunch of gets. We had get, match and URL. And then when we matched the right URL, we had some code inside the function, and then the function would usually return a template. And it's all in one server RB. So if we had like get posts, but then we also had comments, we would just have get comments down here, and if we had pictures, we'd have get pictures. So basically the bigger the site gets, the more everything goes in there. Controllers is the same thing, but now it's split. So I just made a cars controller, or a cars everything, and so now the posts index show new edit goes into the post controller, and the cars index show new edit go into the cars controller. So it's that same putting in the code for the page. Oops, can't see that. The ERB thing is temporarily not here. It's happening by magic as well. I'll come back to it, but pretend it is. So the same way we have get post index, we have get cars index. Yes, and so that's why there's not really a hierarchy of controllers. It's like each controller is equal. Like everything to do with posts goes in posts. Everything to do with images in images controller. Everything in sign up controller. And that's not really enforced. You're free to put posts stuff in the pictures controller and pictures in the post controller. So it's not that there's anything particularly magic. Well, okay, there's lots of magic, but in that case, not so much. It's mostly just a way of splitting that server RB into multiple files. Because especially when you get to a huge site, you end up with like 20 different controllers that if you put them all in one, it'll get messy.
It makes it easier to like see when errors as well, right? If you have to scroll through like 200 pages of server RB.
Yes, when you have a 2,000 line piece of code, and actually, well, maybe mention it. So in PHP gets a bad reputation for being horrible to write code in because it doesn't enforce any of this. It lets you put the entire thing, like all your HTML, all your code, into one single file. And so it kind of allows you to be messy. And if you're like a really like good coder and you have like good self-discipline, you can keep it tidy, but unless you're like super good, everyone just makes a mess. Whereas this is kind of like really enforcing like alright. So, I need a diagram. Oh, actually no, okay, so we're going to do one more thing that won't make any sense, but then I'm going to do the diagram that will explain it. Because, again in server RB, we've mixed a lot of stuff. That for each page, we have like the URL matching, like what URL should this, like browser asks for an URL, which action should handle it. And we've mixed it all into server RB. Because each, like it's next, like it's part of the action, does that make sense? Like the URL matching and the action are in one section. And then the next URL and the action is in the next one. There, aside from the comments, there are no URLs in these controllers because it's split. The problem is in the beginning it's going to make no sense again. Config. And this is where it's going to make no sense until the diagram and a couple more examples, but oh wait, hold on. So we're going to explain this multiple times because it's quite weird. So in Sinatra, I go to the browser, if I can find the browser. I go to an URL. Sinatra figures out which page to respond by going through each of the actions until it finds an URL that matches. And in this case it matched this one. Right after the URL matching we have the content for the page, like the code that runs it. In Rails, those two sections are split. This line 22, goes into routes.rb, and 23 and 24 go into the controller over here. And that's gonna get pretty weird. So, gonna explain that several times, but that's the thing, that now so that's just the introduction. So we'll do an example to make it a bit clearer. Because it's the kind of thing that just sounds like words. It's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, but not. So let's go through the process of adding an entirely new page. And we'll see like how those three pieces fit together. So let's start at the end with the easiest bit of what was the question? The view, yes, is the word. So we want to create a view. Actually, you'll also notice that it put the views into different folders, the generators. So it keeps everything tidy by kind of politely enforcing that you put everything with cars in the cars folder and posts in the post folder. So again, when you have 10,000 things, it gets not too untidy. So we want to add a new file or a new folder, when we did the generator, we had a field called published. I want to create a new page that only shows published posts. So we're going to work through how would I create that. Let's see. So we need in app views posts a new file called published.html.erb. And in it just put some text, like published pages. Doesn't matter, we just want to see it working. Everybody got that? Mm-hmm. Okay. And if we were doing it in Sinatra, we would just do one of these, like get something URL, like when the user goes to this URL, I want to print out published blah blah blah. But, so it's now split, that chunk is split into the controller and the routes. And let's start with the controller first. Actually, no, let's start with the URL. So lines 2 and 3, there's a couple of crazy lines, and they are a bit magic. In that they look weird, but they're kind of a shortcut to something else. When it says resources, it means copy and paste this thing from over here and use this pattern. So we're not going to worry about those for the moment. We're going to go with the more sensible ones. And I think we want get posts. Oh, I see. We want it. It's going to have to be above the resources. And get posts / published. I'm deliberately calling it articles just to prove that these two aren't the same. Oh, actually, am I? No, okay, let's just call it published. Actually, let's stick with that. Okay, so everybody got that? So post/published. This file has slightly crazy syntax. So it's mostly just you look for an example that fits what you want and then make sure your one matches. I know this is what we want. Don't worry about how we got there. And okay, so we've told it I want when the user goes to this URL that the post controller published action should handle it. And so let's just go there. If you go to post/published, it will explode. Oh, not that one. It will explode and give us some clues. Oh, crap. Or will it? Oh, yeah, okay. Oh. Okay, well, it should have broke, but apparently they've made it even more convenient than I thought. Or it's made it work for me. I was expecting to have to do another step, but
What did you do?
well, it used to break. You used to have to make a controller action to make it work, which is sensible, that like you have to have something to tell it what to do. But apparently in the later versions they've added some clever stuff that if you don't have an action it just goes, well, I assume you wanted to do this, so I'll do it for you. Okay. Never mind. Okay, but what we told it was when the user goes to this URL, post publish, I want the posts controller published action to handle it. So it'll look through index, nope, show, post, nope, until it finds one called published. It worked, but it shouldn't have, it should have, but just for my demo it shouldn't have. So let's just pretend it didn't and add that action. So I'm deliberately not going to render the template just yet. I'm going to make it print out an error saying, this is me. Because I just want to prove, is this piece of code the bit of code that is running the page? Ooh. Ah. Alright, so, and if you haven't seen it before, the raise thing just means like, make an error happen and print out this message. And it's quite nice as a debugging thing, because it's printed out, I will handle the page. So it's kind of gone to step 1, 2, 3, and then just gone like, nope, I'm going to stop and print this out. Not even going to try and get to the template. Alright, so is that bit making sense? That we're pretty sure that now this published thing is the one that is doing the code. Oops.
But it doesn't say what the problem is?
Or the problem is the raise. Or raise, oops, where are we gone? Like raise literally means like make an error happen. Like be an error. It's just a handy way of like printing stuff out, because it immediately like explodes. I think it's kind of like that. It's like saying instead of doing step 1 to 10, like when you get to step 3, like literally just blow up the app and print out this message.
Okay.
Because then you can see what was happening on step 3 instead of trying to get to 10 and look backwards.
But the only error message you get is like the one you invoked yourself.
Yeah. So it's literally just it gives you a red page with the text. Okay, so we've, what have we got? So we've got the action, but we've told it, so the chain so far is when I go to this URL, go to this controller, and go to this action. So it goes to this controller, it goes to this action, and now we're back into the same place we were with Sinatra. It's like we've just arrived on line 23, where now we can gather our posts and print out a template. So, what do we want? Let's do add posts. Oops. Posts equals post.where published true. No, let's see. Alright, and we're about to hit something weird, which I will again try and come back to a few times. If you reload this page, you should now still see published pages. So it ended up rendering this published pages template. But you'll notice we didn't tell it to. In Sinatra we always told it ERB blah, ERB blah. I want you to use this template, like we were explicit. Rails, unless you tell it to, will look for a template with the same name. So we're in the post controller published action. It'll just look in views, posts, published.html.erb. In fact, I think if I rename this to not published, this is now going to explode and say missing template posts published. And it looked in the view folder for something called post published. So that's something that's quite neat with Rails. And again, this is like this is what I mean by magic. It's doing stuff for you. That can be confusing, but then once you get it, it's much quicker.
Can we find the ERB command somewhere, or is it just not there?
It's somewhere magically. So we can like manually tell it. Somewhere deep inside Rails code itself, it exploded. So we could look at the code to see how it decides, but we wouldn't really get anything.
Okay.
But that's the gist. And the reason is because that's usually what you want to do. That the index will render the index, the show page will render the show. Like if you're on posts index, it's unlikely you want to render pictures Korea. You still have the option to do it if you want, but it's more like, unless you tell me not to, I'm just going to follow this pattern. And again, this is how Rails lets you develop stuff so quickly that you don't have to think about so much stuff, and you kind of, it forces you into this nice tidy pattern, and the tidy pattern turns out to be nice. Some other frameworks kind of force you into a pattern, but that's quite irritating. One of the first ones I worked with was a Java framework, and it was awful because it made you do things a particular way, that you had to do it in step 1, 2, 3, but if you
do with you.
Yeah.
What you want to do.
Yeah, and that meant sometimes if you were in some situation where you needed step 3 to happen first, you had to do crazy. You basically had to fight against it, whereas Rails for the most part manages to avoid that. It generally works out. Okay, just for a laugh, I think actually I'm going to reuse the index. How do I do this? I can't remember. Render index. So I'm going to tell it to reuse the index template. So this is one example where the action doesn't match.
And what's the difference between ERB and render?
None. It's just the words that they use.
Oh.
Or I guess actually, or it's not so important, but in this one, this command is very explicit behind the scenes. I guess it's behind the scenes that are different. From the front, you don't really notice. Like ERB is very like, I want you to get this template, give me back the response. Whereas this one is kind of, or the Rails one is like, hey, if it's not too much trouble, could you get that template and figure out how to make it go to the right place? For actual practical purposes, there's no difference.
Oh.
I mean, that is kind of a thing in Rails, certainly in the beginning, is like, it's kind of like just learning the patterns. Because, in fact, there are some bits that you don't want to understand. Like, there's bits that I figured out how it worked and then was like, oh my god, that's insane. I really regret knowing that. Just because it's so crazy and messy behind the scenes to make the magic work, that it makes your head hurt. But on the other hand, like the validations thing, like there's weird magic that it connects things to other things, and then there's a thing that talks to other things, and it's very, very complicated. But on the other hand, just to use it, or it's complicated to understand like the mechanics of how it works, but to use it is just like validates presence, true, done. And then you move on to the next thing. So that kind of happens a lot in Rails of just, once I figured out how to use it, like yeah, someday it'll be nice to learn really how it works, but there's a very good chance you'll never gain anything from it, so it's only really it's more like if you're interested, go and look for it, rather than if you need it. Okay, but I've told it to render the index, it should hopefully render the index now. Bish bash bosh. Publish true. I'm just going to create a new post that is not published. So I'm going to leave this unchecked. So then if I'm on posts index, I see both. If I go to posts published, I only see the one that was published. Alright. So let's review that a little bit. And actually, so okay, different perspective. Okay, so there is no such thing as a website, as an individual thing. It's more like you are on the browser will ask the site for a page. Like you as a human being know all of the pages come together to form a website, but the browser doesn't. It just says, give me the homepage, give me the second blog post. So, browser asks for a page. The routes file is the only thing at that point that is responsible. It's like it's split into responsibilities. That the routes file decides, somebody has asked me for an URL, who should I ask to do the work? And it's the only thing that worries about that, and vice versa, it doesn't worry about anything else. It's literally, someone has asked me for images /27/comments, who should I go to? And so that's what these are. You end up with like a bunch of commands, some crazier than others, that say, when the user asks for this URL, this is the controller action that handles it. There's only ever one controller action that does the work. So it's like, it looks through the list and decides which is the best one to pick, or the right one to pick, and goes to there. So, in this case, we told it, this is the controller action for this URL. So now we jump over here. We find the controller, we find the action. And at that point, the routes file gives up. Okay, so we've got the URL, we've told somebody to do the job, the end result is we want some HTML. The controller action is totally in charge of doing that, so he's free to do whatever he likes. He can talk to Twitter, he can look at the database, he can do stuff with ERB, but at the end of the day, he wants to give back some ERB, or no, some HTML generally. Where was I going with that? So yeah, then usually what the general pattern is that the controller action will decide what template to use, and at that point we're in the template land where it's just HTML. And okay, a lot of the time it's just implied which template to use, but it's the same pattern. That it's gonna, so the steps are step 1, routes file decides what controller action should do the work. Controller action decides what HTML template is going to be the best one. HTML template gives back HTML, and it goes back up the chain and goes to the browser. It goes, okay, I'm done. And that chain, that loop, is I think the most important thing to learn in the beginning, because I think it's the easiest bit to get confused on. Because it's more like, you never really actually do that. It's usually the other way around of like, well, I want to have a page where the user can sign in and upload a picture. But then you have to kind of break down the what do I want compared with what does Rails expect, and figure out how to bring them closer together. Or break your concept for like, I don't know, Twitter or Amazon or something into individual pages, and then figure out, okay, I need somewhere for the user to sign in, so I need a sign in page. For a sign in page I need to have an URL, so I need to tell the routes file about that URL, and somebody needs to do something on the sign in page, so I need a controller action for the sign in page. Then I'm going to need some HTML for the form, so okay, I need a form, so it's like chunk, 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 chunk. And it's like, you can go from both directions. So just to kind of prove it a little bit, I want to add one little thing to the routes file. So we're going to add a second URL to the same page. Featured. I'm going to put a nice white space. You don't really need to. Just makes it easier to read. Alright, so trick question time. What happens when I go to, oh, hang on, get the browser. So, what controller action is going to handle this page? Alright, bingo, we go to published. And what controller action will handle this page? Same one. Hopefully it should look identical. So, because it's following that same step 1, 2, 3, routes file, controller, template. And each step kind of doesn't care about the other two steps. That
very,
we've
very abstracted there.
Yep. Which keeps things really tidy. It keeps each part quite small. That we don't have to worry in here what's happening, what URL I'm on, vice versa. The template never has to worry, how did I get here? It's just, hey, somebody wants a table. Yeah. So just to wrap up, I think we'll have a little break in a minute. But so that's the kind of core Rails process. Is go to a page, or like the browser goes to a page, the routes file decides which controller. So in this case we have two URLs that both go to the same controller, and the controller doesn't care. It just gets told, hey, you render yourself, make yourself do your work.
So you can literally see like turn to page 4, go to like paragraph 8, and then do that. It's simple. It's as simple as that.
Yep.
The routes file.
Yep. I mean, personally, I think of it as like asking. It's like if you go to the pizza shop, you say, "Can I have a pizza?" And they bring you back a pizza. You don't worry about how they did it. You just trust that they did it. So in this case, it's like the routes file says, like, "Hey, can you I know you're in charge of doing this page, so can you just do this page?" And it doesn't It doesn't tell it anything, it doesn't ask for anything back, it doesn't like, there's no complexity, it's just like, it's your job now, you figure it out. Okay, but controller action, there's only ever one controller action for the page, it's the one that the routes file asks for. It's free to do anything, just like in Sinatra, and in the end you have a template. Your template is usually named the same as the action, but doesn't have to be. And when you get to the template, it's back to normal HTML. Okay, and then as the last review, so because in the beginning we did the generator thing, and it did magic, and suddenly we had like a half-finished website without really doing anything. And that's basically what it did. It created something in the routes file, it created a controller, and it created some templates. And so none of those were particularly crazily magic. There's little bits of the kind of small bits of magic, but that's the general jump. It's still using that same pattern. Okay, I think we'll take a break because my voice is starting to go.